The first time Karen blocked the driveway, Michael thought it was an honest mistake. Her shiny white SUV was parked halfway across the narrow entrance, making it nearly impossible for him to back out. He waited a few minutes, thinking she'd come out and move it, but no one appeared. With a deep breath, he knocked on her door, trying to stay calm. She opened it with a smug smile, holding a cup of coffee like she had all the time in the world. "Oh, relax," she said dismissively. "I'll move it when I'm ready." Michael clenched his jaw but said nothing. He was new to the neighborhood and didn't want to start a fight on the first week. After 10 more minutes, she finally strolled over to her car and slowly reversed, waving at him like she was doing him a favor. It was a small annoyance, but it set the tone for what was to come. A few days later, it happened again. Then again. And soon it became a routine. Every morning, Karen parked in his driveway, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, always with the same careless attitude. She claimed it was just temporary, and not a big deal. But for Michael, it was more than just inconvenient. It was disrespect. The neighborhood had rules, but Karen acted like they didn't apply to her. She called herself the unofficial queen of the street, joking to others that she had the best parking spot. Michael tried to reason with her several times, but she brushed him off each time with a sarcastic grin. What started as mild irritation began to simmer into frustration. He realized she wasn't making a mistake at all. She was doing it on purpose, just to prove she could. Michael's patience wore thinner with each passing day. The second chapter of this unspoken war began on a rainy Tuesday morning, when he had a job interview scheduled across town. He walked out to his car, dressed sharply, carrying his portfolio, only to find Karen's SUV sitting squarely in the middle of his driveway again. Its wipers were still flicking back and forth lazily, as if mocking him. His heart pounded with frustration. He marched up to her door and knocked harder than before. When she opened it, her tone was already laced with arrogance. "Yes," she drawled, sipping from her oversized mug. "You're blocking my driveway," Michael said evenly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I've got somewhere important to be." She tilted her head, feigning surprise. "Oh, this again? You make such a big deal out of nothing. It's not like I'm hurting anyone." "Move the car," he said through gritted teeth. She sighed dramatically, like she was being asked for the greatest favor in the world. She took her sweet time grabbing her keys, locking the door, and strutting down the path. The rain poured harder as Michael stood there, soaked and fuming, watching her move slower than anyone he'd ever seen. By the time she finally reversed, he was 10 minutes late leaving. That day he nearly missed his interview. Sitting in traffic, wet and furious, Michael realized something had changed inside him. This wasn't about parking anymore. It was about control, and Karen loved having it. She enjoyed seeing him lose his cool, while she stayed smug and untouchable. When he returned home, he didn't even glance at her house. But his mind was already working, quietly and carefully. He wasn't going to let this continue forever. One way or another, she was going to learn. The next weekend, Michael decided it was time to try a different approach. Instead of confronting Karen directly, he documented everything. He bought a small security camera and mounted it above his garage, angled perfectly toward the driveway. If she was going to keep playing her little game, he'd make sure there was no denying it. Sure enough, the following morning her SUV rolled in like clockwork. She parked halfway across his driveway, grabbed her tote bag, and walked off as if she owned the entire neighborhood. Michael checked the footage and saved the clip. Over the next few days he collected video after video, each time stamped and crystal clear. He also began taking photos from different angles, close-ups of the license plate, shots of how far into his property she parked, everything he'd need if this escalated. Karen had no idea she was building a case against herself with every smug smirk and careless parking job. On the fourth day, Michael politely confronted her again, hoping she might take the hint. "Karen, this has to stop," he said, showing her one of the photos on his phone. She barely glanced at it. "Oh please," she scoffed. "It's not like you're calling the cops over a little parking. You wouldn't dare." She laughed and walked away, tossing her keys into her bag. That laugh stuck with him more than anything. It wasn't just arrogance, it was confidence. She truly believed she was untouchable. But now Michael wasn't just angry. He was prepared. He spent that evening organizing the clips, labeling dates and times, and saving backups. If she wanted a game, he'd play it smarter. This wasn't about yelling anymore. This was about setting the stage for something she wouldn't see coming. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Michael had invited a few friends over for a small backyard barbecue. Something simple to unwind after a long week. He made sure the driveway was clear so his guests could park without hassle. But right before they arrived, Karen's white SUV rolled in, as if on cue, and she parked dead center again. No knock, no explanation, no hesitation. She just walked into her house like nothing happened. Michael stood at the window, gripping the curtain with one hand. His friends started arriving one by one, forced to park down the street and walk in the dark. Who parks there like that? One of them asked, clearly annoyed. Michael forced a calm smile, trying to keep the evening from being ruined, but inside, the frustration burned like fire. Karen was no longer just disrespecting him. She was making her presence felt, marking territory that wasn't hers. At one point, a friend jokingly suggested calling a tow truck, but Michael shook his head. He wasn't ready to make that move just yet, not without a solid plan. Instead, he used the moment to his advantage. He took more pictures, capturing the SUV blocking the entire entrance with the time and date stamped clearly. His friends witnessed everything, giving him even more credibility if things escalated. As the night went on, Karen's house stayed dark, her car unmoved. It was as if she parked there just to prove she could. Michael sat in his backyard, pretending to laugh with his friends, but his mind wasn't on the jokes. He replayed every encounter, every dismissive laugh, every delay she'd caused. By the time the last guest left, he wasn't just angry anymore. He was determined. The next time she pulled this stunt, it wouldn't end the same way. The following morning, Michael woke up early with a clear plan forming in his mind. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out the front window, half expecting Karen's SUV to roll in again. Sure enough, like clockwork, she pulled up, blocking the driveway with the same careless precision. She didn't even glance toward his house this time. She just got out, locked the car, and disappeared inside. It wasn't coincidence anymore. She was doing it to get under his skin. Michael didn't confront her. Instead, he grabbed his phone and started making calls. First, he spoke to the local parking enforcement department. He learned that although it was his private property, repeated obstruction gave him legal grounds to have her vehicle towed. He then called a towing company and asked them a few questions, quietly, methodically. He wanted to make sure everything would be done by the book. The dispatcher confirmed that as long as he provided proof of ownership and documentation of the repeated violations, the tow would be legal and irreversible. When he hung up, Michael smiled for the first time in weeks. He returned to his camera system, downloaded every clip, and neatly organized them. He even printed a few still frames. For extra insurance, he called the HOA office to log a formal complaint. Though they sounded hesitant to get involved, he made sure the record existed. By midday, he walked outside with a piece of chalk and marked the property line clearly on the driveway. Anyone passing by could see where his land began and ended. It wasn't just for show, it was preparation. Karen thought this was just a game she could win with arrogance. But Michael wasn't reacting anymore. He was preparing to end it, permanently and on his terms. On Monday morning, the opportunity arrived like clockwork. Michael sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching through the window as Karen's SUV rolled up once again. She parked it right across his driveway with a smug precision, as if daring him to say something. This time, though, there was no anger bubbling inside him, only a calm readiness. He quietly reached for his phone and dialed the towing company he had spoken to days earlier. The dispatcher recognized his address immediately. "We'll send someone out in 20 minutes, she said. Michael thanked her politely and went outside, pretending to water the plants. Karen stepped out of her house, waving her keys with that same condescending smile. "Oh, are we playing gardener now?" she said, smirking. Michael didn't respond. He didn't need to. Minutes later, the rumble of a tow truck echoed down the street. Karen's smirk faded slightly as the big white truck turned onto their block, yellow lights flashing. The driver stepped out with paperwork in hand, confirmed Michael's documentation, and began hooking up her SUV like it was just another job. The neighbors peeked through their windows, whispers rippling down the street. Karen came running out in a fury, shouting, "You can't do this. That's my car." Michael stood calmly on the sidewalk, holding his printed documents and property line photos. "Actually," he said evenly, "I can. And I just did." The tow truck driver didn't even look at her. He was just doing his job. As the SUV was lifted off the ground, Karen's outrage turned to disbelief. For the first time, she didn't have control. Michael didn't yell, didn't gloat. He simply watched as the truck disappeared down the road. The game had finally shifted, and she knew it. The entire neighborhood was buzzing by the next morning. Word had spread fast that Karen's prized SUV had been towed right off Michael's driveway. Some neighbors pretended not to care, but others couldn't hide their quiet satisfaction. Karen had irritated plenty of people with her entitled behavior over the years, and someone had finally stood up to her. Karen, however, was fuming. She stormed down the street in her bright pink jacket, ranting to anyone who would listen. "He stole my car," she barked at Mrs. Thompson, who just gave a polite nod and quickly retreated indoors. She cornered Mr. Lee, accusing Michael of harassment, but he simply raised his hands and said, "Karen, you parked on his driveway. What did you expect?" That only made her angrier. Meanwhile, Michael sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the storm unravel with quiet satisfaction. He had expected her to throw a fit, but he hadn't expected how alone she would be in it. No one was rushing to defend her this time. By afternoon, Karen banged on his door, red-faced and livid. "You're going to pay for this," she shouted. "I had to pay hundreds to get my car back." Michael opened the door slowly, calm as ever. "Or," he said evenly, "you could just stop parking on my driveway. Problem solved." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She wasn't used to someone holding their ground. She stomped off, slamming her heels against the pavement like a tantruming child. Michael watched her go, knowing the message had been delivered loud and clear. For the first time, she realized he wasn't going to bend to her will. And judging by the whispers around the neighborhood, she had lost more than just her car that day. She'd lost her power. Karen's behavior changed after that day, but not in the way Michael hoped. She didn't stop, she got sneakier. Instead of parking directly across the driveway, she began leaving her SUV just close enough to make backing out difficult. It was a petty move, carefully measured so it wouldn't technically cross the property line. She thought she'd found a loophole, a way to keep harassing him without getting towed again. Michael noticed the pattern almost immediately. Every morning, her SUV crept closer and closer, inch by inch, like a territorial marker. Neighbors started whispering about how childish she looked, but Karen didn't seem to care. She wasn't just fighting him for a parking spot. She was fighting for control she no longer had. Michael didn't confront her this time. Instead, he quietly called the city's code enforcement office. He explained the situation in detail and sent over his security footage, showing her repeated obstruction. The officer on the other end of the line sounded tired but firm. "This isn't the first time we've had complaints about her," they admitted. "If she keeps it up, we can issue citations." Within 2 days, a bright orange warning notice appeared on her windshield. Karen ripped it off furiously and stomped into her house, but the message was clear. The law was now on Michael's side. That evening, as Michael took out the trash, she glared at him from her porch. "You think you've won?" she hissed. Michael didn't even respond. He didn't need to. Her power plays were starting to backfire one by one, and she knew it. For the first time since moving in, Michael felt the tension shift entirely. Karen wasn't in control anymore. She was grasping at straws, and the neighborhood was finally seeing it too. By the following week, Karen's tantrums had grown louder, but her grip on the neighborhood was slipping fast. The warning notice on her SUV had embarrassed her, and her usual crowd of gossipy allies was beginning to distance themselves. She had always thrived on being the loudest voice on the street, but now, people were avoiding her altogether. The HOA board, tired of the constant complaints involving her, quietly scheduled a review meeting to address her behavior. Michael didn't need to do much anymore. Karen was unraveling all on her own. He continued documenting everything calmly, keeping copies of every notice, every video clip, and every interaction. When a second warning citation appeared on her SUV after she edged too close to his driveway again, her face turned pale. This time it wasn't just a warning, it came with a fine. She tried to rally the neighborhood like she always had. She went door to door complaining about how unfair Michael was, how he was ruining the community, but no one took her side. Some people even reminded her of how many times she had blocked their own driveways or shouted at delivery drivers. Her reign of petty power was collapsing in real time. Michael remained calm and distant. He didn't yell, didn't gloat, didn't even engage with her. The silence frustrated her more than any argument could have. Late one evening, she parked her SUV farther down the street for the first time in months. Michael watched from his porch, not saying a word. She shot him one last angry glare, but behind it was something new: defeat. For the first time, she understood that she couldn't bully her way out of this one. The law, the neighbors, and her own arrogance had finally cornered her. The final blow came at the HOA board meeting that Friday evening. The room was packed, more than usual, with neighbors who had grown tired of Karen's constant drama. She arrived wearing her usual forced smile, but it was easy to see the tension in her eyes. The HOA president cleared his throat, holding a thick folder of complaints, most of them tied to her name. Michael sat quietly near the back, not there to speak, just to listen. The board laid everything out in order. The repeated parking violations, the official towing report, the code enforcement citations, and the growing number of neighbor complaints. For years, Karen had operated on intimidation and loudness. But this time, the facts were louder than she was. She tried to interrupt, waving her hands and claiming she was being targeted. But no one backed her up. Her voice, once the dominant force in every meeting, now sounded small and desperate. The HOA voted overwhelmingly to issue formal sanctions against her. She was fined for multiple violations and stripped of her role on the community parking committee, a title she'd clung to like a crown. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a public fall from her self-proclaimed throne. Karen stormed out of the meeting without another word. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. By the next morning, her SUV was parked neatly down the street, far from Michael's driveway. The neighbors began greeting Michael more warmly, relieved the tension was finally over. Michael didn't celebrate with a big gesture. Instead, he sat on his porch, sipping his coffee like he had many mornings before, but this time with quiet satisfaction. The battle was over, not because he yelled the loudest, but because he played it smarter. Karen had finally learned the hard way. Power built on arrogance doesn't last forever.